All right. Shout out to my buddy Greg G over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. He said, "Hey, Lou, we need to see an Oklahoma schedule preview." Say less, fam. Here you go. The Oklahoma schedule for 2025. We're going to go through it today. Before we get started on that, though, 6-7 last year for Oklahoma, and obviously a disappointing season. I mean, it's just unacceptable for Oklahoma to ever have a record like that. Year 2 under Brent Venables. This is a very important year for him. I feel like it hasn't gone well for Venables there. The quarterback situation last year was a complete mess. They went with Jackson Arnold. That didn't work. They benched him to put the other guy in. That didn't work. Go back to Jackson Arnold. Now Jackson Arnold hits the portal. They bring in John Mateer from Washington State. Now, he had a great year last year at Washington State, almost 4,000 yards, 44 total touchdowns. He can run and throw. He had almost 900 yards rushing. I think it was like 32 or 3,300 yards passing he had, and about 800 yards rushing for a total of around 4,000 yards and the 44 touchdowns. And of course, we saw last season Cam Ward transfer from Washington State to Miami and have an unbelievable season. So Oklahoma obviously hoping John Mateer can have a similar level of success this season at Oklahoma. And it could be that Brent Venables' job depends on it. I'd be curious to know what Oklahoma fans feel about that in terms of, is Venables on the hot seat? What would another 6-7 season or worse mean for Brent Venables at Oklahoma? It is a little interesting to sort of keep an eye on the coaching carousel in college football in this new age where the schools are now basically required to pay the players $20 million a year. We saw Florida choose to keep Billy Napier after last year, when a lot of people speculated that might be his last year. And there's some sort of talk going around that, one of the reasons, and I'm using Florida as an example, but this, going forward, over the last 10 years or so, we've seen coaches have a very short leash. There's been a lot of coaches who have been fired after 3 years, 4 years, right? And you have to pay these huge buyouts. Well, now that the schools have to pay this $20 million a year to the players, there's some talk that maybe these schools are going to be more lenient with the coaches, maybe give them a little bit more time, which I don't think would necessarily be a bad thing. We'll see. But Oklahoma is not a school or a program that's going to tolerate very many losing seasons, 6-7. Now, they did beat Alabama. And, for what that's worth, here's a pat on the back for you. But, was that all that big of an accomplishment last year? I mean, Alabama lost to not one, not two, but three unranked teams last year, including Oklahoma. So, I don't know if Kalen DeBoer doesn't know what he's doing or what the case was down there at Alabama, but that was probably their best win. But then they turn around after that and lose to Navy in a bowl game. And I know Navy was a decent team last year, group of 5 team. But look, Oklahoma, man, we don't tolerate this in the SEC. You can't be running around losing a group of 5 teams in the postseason. It's unacceptable. And you can talk about opt-outs or anything. It's complete. There's no way there's an Oklahoma fan on anywhere on planet Earth that is willing to rationalize to me Oklahoma losing to Navy. If Oklahoma has a program has fallen so far that it's no big deal to you that Oklahoma lost to Navy, well, then my expectations for Oklahoma are obviously a lot higher than yours are. But Oklahoma needs to get things turned around. It's going to go through John Mateer. I think they played a lot of young players last year, so they do have some experienced talent that will be taking the field this year. They need to improve, obviously, in several places on the team, and we'll see if they can do that. Taking a look at the schedule here, though, which is the point of this video. Of course, the SEC schedules in 2025 are the opposite of last season. So what I mean by that is you play all the same conference teams in 25 that you played in 24. You're just swapping home and away, right? So, I talked about the Alabama game. You beat them at home last year late in the season. Well, that means this year you go to Tuscaloosa. And same thing for every other SEC team you played last year. If you played them at home last year, you play them on the road this year. If you played them on the road last year, you play them at home this year. And then, of course, there's the Texas game, which is a neutral site every single year. But let's go through the schedule. Some things that I like to look at right away when I look at a team schedule is, of course, the non-con games. Now, this changes every single year, right? Regardless of what conference you're in, the non-con schedule tends to change every single year. There's a few schools that play the same non-con teams every year for rivalry purposes. You think Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, that kind of thing. But generally, your non-con is going to change every single year. That's the case, obviously, here with Oklahoma. They start things out Saturday, August 30th, week 1, with a home game against Illinois State. Now, I don't know how everybody else feels about it. Yeah, Georgia's my favorite team. I don't hide that. Most of you probably know that. To me, the offseason is more exciting as a Georgia fan when there's a big game in week one. And Georgia doesn't have that this year. In fact, Georgia's first 2 games are against group of 5 teams. So I'm not picking on Oklahoma here. But the offseason is more exciting to me when you have sort of a big week 1 game to look forward to. Now, they have a big week 2 game, huge, which we'll talk about in a second. But if there's going to be a year where maybe you don't mind playing one of these lower level teams in week 1, maybe this is that year for Oklahoma. You know, coming off of a pretty bad 6-7 season last year, you've got a brand new quarterback. Now, he's got a lot of experience having played at Washington State last year and had a lot of success there. But in terms of, you know, Oklahoma, this will be his first start as a quarterback at Oklahoma. So maybe this is a good season to kind of, you don't want to call it a preseason game, but kind of a warm up before that Michigan game, let, John Mateer get kind of his feet wet type of a deal against a very beatable opponent before Michigan comes to town that following week. And that is the week 2 opponent, Saturday, September 6th. Oklahoma hosts Michigan, which is interesting. Oklahoma and Michigan both had disappointing seasons last year. Michigan was coming off of a national title season. They ended up with a disappointing season. Now they went 8-5. Because they also beat Alabama. Interesting there. Oklahoma and Michigan both beat Alabama last year. Oklahoma in the regular season, Michigan in the bowl game. Michigan finished 8-5. Oklahoma 6-7. So these are 2 teams that kind of had down years last year. Oklahoma a little worse than Michigan. These are 2 teams with brand new quarterbacks too. Michigan's likely, in my opinion, going to go with Bryce Underwood. I don't really see the downside for Michigan going with Bryce Underwood, Sharon Moore, year 2 head coach there. He's got a little bit of leeway having, now he didn't win the Natty, at least not as head coach. That was Harbaugh, but Michigan won a Natty 2 years ago. A little bit of a down year last year. Again, 8-5 though, capped it off with a win over Bama. If you're going to roll the dice and go with a freshman quarterback, I think Sharon Moore's got the rope to do that. And I would be surprised if they didn't do that. So you're going to have probably 2 first-year starting quarterbacks here, at least at their respective schools. Again, John Mateer's got experience at Washington State. But this is a huge game here in Norman, SEC versus Big Ten. So you got that whole sort of deal wrapped up in it. So that's going to be a good game. One of the bigger non-con games of the entire season here, Oklahoma versus Michigan. Maybe not 2 of the best teams, but in terms of like brand recognition, I mean, it's hard to find 2 schools with bigger sort of name and brand recognition than Michigan, Oklahoma, 2 blue blood programs there. That'll be a great game. Everyone will be watching. Week 2, Saturday, September 6th. Oklahoma hosts Michigan. Another non-con game after that on the road at Temple. Again, that'll be a winnable game. So you sort of look at the first 3 games here before you head into conference play with that home game against Auburn in week 4 on September 20th. It's going to be 3-0 or 2-1, right? This isn't a prediction video. I do my predictions a little bit later in the offseason. I usually start those around May or June. But before you do predictions, you have to have an understanding of the team's schedules, right? Because all these schedules are different, even within the same league. Some team, in a certain conference can have a much easier schedule than some other team. So, you got to start somewhere. I kind of start by looking at these schedules. So not a prediction here, but obviously you see Illinois State and Temple on the schedule. Even coming off a 6-7 season like Oklahoma did, you got to assume Oklahoma's going to be massive favorites and most likely win both of those games. So in terms of the first 3 games of the season, the first 3 non-con games there, 2-1 at the absolute worst, right? And we'll see what happens in the Michigan game, but Oklahoma could be 3-0 heading into SEC play again at home for Auburn. So you do play at Temple. Why you're doing that, I don't know. I don't know why you're scheduling a game at Temple. You might want to look into that for future reference. But 3 of your first 4 games are at home, including the first SEC game of the season at home against Auburn. Another team that is sort of looking to make a move this season. This is year 3 for Hugh Freeze. The first 2 years were extremely disappointing. Auburn, another team that's going to have a new quarterback this season. So we'll see. You get them at home. I think it's an obvious benefit there. This was a great game last year, by the way. I'm not sure how many people paid attention to it or watched it at the end of the year. The Auburn-Oklahoma game, because both teams had kind of played themselves out of contention for anything meaningful by that point. But it was a great game. Should be another good one this time in Norman. First SEC game of the year for Oklahoma. They host the Auburn Tigers. Then you get a bye week. Every team has 2 bye weeks again this season. So when you look at where these bye weeks fall for Oklahoma, in terms of how they're spaced out, I like that. You play 4 games, you have a bye week. You play 5 games, you have a bye week, and then you play your last 3 games. So they're spread out pretty good in terms of, okay, you play your first 4 games, you sort of get a bye week to step back, assess the first month of the season, heal up whatever injured or hurt players you might have that are banged up or whatever the case. So it falls at a good point on the calendar. I don't like that it comes before the Kent State game. I think, most people, fans, even coaches, if they had their way, would take a bye week before maybe a bigger game. For example, you have a bye week before Kent State, and then after Kent State is the Texas game. I'm sure in a perfect world, most Oklahoma fans would move that Kent State game up to where the bye week is and move the bye week down to the week before Texas to give yourselves a couple of weeks to prepare for that huge rivalry game every year played at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. But the last preseason game of the season is Kent State, coming off of that bye week at home on October 4th before the Red River Shootout against Texas, which is a huge game every year. It doesn't matter whether Oklahoma's 0-5 when this game is played, Texas is 5-0, or Texas is 0-5 and Oklahoma's 5-0, or they're both 0. It doesn't matter what the records are in that. It's a huge game. It's one of the top 2 or 3 rivalries in all of college football. And we could argue about that for an hour if you want to. Yeah, that game, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Auburn. I think those are the 3 best rivalries in college football. You can put them in whatever order you want. My order, you ask? Oh, my order? Michigan, Ohio State, I think is the best rivalry in football right now. I think Auburn, Alabama is number 2 right now. And I would put Texas, Oklahoma 3rd. That's going to make some of y'all mad, but I really don't give a shit. But anyway, that'll be a huge game. Texas is a top 5 team heading into the in the offseason, heading into next year. They made the playoffs for the 2nd year in a row last year, won a game, beat Clemson, did not win the national title, did not win the SEC. They lost to Georgia twice last year, once in the regular season, once in the SEC championship game, beat Clemson in the playoffs. So a good season last year for Texas, but like Oklahoma, they've got a new quarterback this year now. It's new in that he's the starter for the first time this season, but it's not a new name. It's Arch Manning. We've kind of been waiting to see him take the reins there for a couple of years now. We're going to get to see it this season. Oklahoma, Texas, October 11th. Always one of the biggest games of the year. Very difficult game after that. This is a concern game when I look at this schedule here. But the Texas, anytime you play a rivalry game, it doesn't matter whether it ends up being a blowout or not, right? It's a very emotional game. It's always a physical game when you're talking about rivalries. It is very hard to turn around and get up the next week for a challenging or difficult game. And I don't know what you think about South Carolina as far as a team heading into next season. And I know you haven't been in the SEC that long. Oklahoma, Williams-Brice Stadium can be a very difficult place to play when the fans are involved. And South Carolina's a pretty good team, which I think they will be. They've got one of the best returning quarterbacks in the SEC. We've talked a lot in this video about teams with new quarterbacks. In fact, when you look at the schedule here, the Power 5 opponents, or I guess now Power 4 opponents that you have leading up to the South Carolina game, Michigan is going to have a new quarterback this year. Auburn is going to have a new quarterback this year. Texas is going to have a new quarterback this year. South Carolina, they're not going to have a new quarterback. They got Lenore Sellers, and he was one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC last year. He's very exciting. He can run around, hurt you with his legs. South Carolina could be a dangerous team, and playing there is no easy task. And to have to play them there the week after the Texas game, people like to talk about trap games or whatever it is. That is a very dangerous game. In fact, if you look at this 4-game stretch right here, it's absolutely brutal, starting with the Texas game. Texas at a neutral site, on the road at Williams-Brice to play South Carolina. And then it doesn't get any easier when you come back home and have to play Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. Again, they'll have a new quarterback this year too. And then on the road at Tennessee, Nico and company, Josh Heupel, Neyland Stadium, clearly a very difficult place to play. So in a 4-week stretch, you've got games at 2 of the most difficult places to play in the SEC. Both of those teams have returning quarterbacks. Both of those teams will be ranked heading into the season. Both of those teams think they have a shot at the playoffs in 2025. Those are going to be 2 very difficult road games there in October at South Carolina and at Neyland. You have 1 home game in October. And that's Ole Miss. That's not going to be an easy one either. And then the 4th game is a neutral site against Texas. This is a brutal October schedule here for Oklahoma. Welcome to the SEC, buddy. This is what you wanted. After that Tennessee game on the road, you have your 2nd bye week before playing on the road at Alabama. How about back-to-back games at Bama and at Tennessee? I know they're separated by a bye week, but holy shit, man. The SEC did you no favors with this scheduling here. I can tell you that right now. Bye week comes at a good spot, though, between two difficult road games. Saturday, November 15th at Bama, then back home to play Missouri, sort of a throwback rivalry to the Big 12 days. And then you finish up the regular season at home against LSU, another team that has a lot of expectations heading into next season. Nussmeier returns as quarterback. Brian Kelly there for, I guess, his fourth season now. Is that right? I believe that's right. So there you go. That's the Oklahoma schedule for 2025. And I'm telling you, that is a pretty difficult schedule here. A lot of talk last year about the sort of varying degrees of difficulty when it came to scheduling between Texas and Oklahoma. Texas has been accused for a long time of receiving preferential treatment from their conference office, the Big 12 back in the day. I don't know that they're receiving preferential treatment from the SEC office. They haven't been in the SEC long enough, really, I don't think, for me to have an opinion on that one way or the other. But without question, Oklahoma was given a much more difficult schedule their first 2 years in the SEC than Texas was. Now, I'm not saying that to say that, Oklahoma's better than Texas and Texas only had a better record because their schedule was easier. The teams played last year and Texas won the game. I mean, we know who was the better team last year, but I'm just being objective here, and I don't give a shit about Texas or Oklahoma, either one. I don't like one or hate the other. This is clearly a much more difficult schedule last year and this year than what Texas had. I don't normally do this on these schedule preview videos, but I'm going to click on this on Texas right here and show you their schedule real quick, because this is just to show you what I'm talking about here. Here you go. So this is the Texas schedule. So keep in mind what we just saw from Oklahoma. In fact, I'll just put them both up. So you see the Oklahoma schedule, you see the Texas schedule. We just went through the Oklahoma schedule game by game, right? Michigan, at Bama, at LSU, at Tennessee, at South Carolina. I mean, these are brutal road games. Okay, now here's Texas. San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. Okay, the SEC doesn't schedule non-con games, so you can't blame the SEC office for that. And then, of course, they start on the road at Ohio State. So in terms of non-con schedules, it's pretty equal there. You host Michigan. They play at Ohio State. So they probably have a tougher non-con than Michigan does, but that's where it ends. You get into the conference schedule here, and it's night and day difference between Texas and Oklahoma. Their road games are at Florida, just a terrible team for 4 or 5 years in a row now. At Kentucky, probably the second worst team in the SEC. At Mississippi State, the worst team in the SEC. They do have to play at Georgia, which will be tough, but those are their road games. So again, Oklahoma, road games, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, South Carolina. That's who Oklahoma plays on the road. Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, LSU. Who does Texas play on the road in the SEC? Garbage can Florida, garbage can Kentucky, garbage can Mississippi State, and Georgia, which will be difficult. You look at their home games in the SEC. Vandy, Arkansas, and they have the Texas A&M game at the end of the year. And, Texas A&M is kind of a crapshoot from year to year. You don't really know what you're going to get there. You just know that they're most likely to finish with 8 wins because, well, that's just what they do. But there's clearly no comparison here between these two schedules. The Oklahoma schedule is clearly much tougher than the Texas schedule. But anyway, okay, enough of that. But we'll put the Oklahoma schedule back up on the screen. Like I said, I don't normally compare schedules in these videos here, but since Texas and Oklahoma just came into the league last year, and you have the whole, the conferences always suck up the Texas storyline that's out there, I figured I would just put them up for comparison's sake. But what do y'all think about this schedule here for Oklahoma? Again, this isn't a prediction video. I start my predictions around the end of May, beginning of June. I got to get through spring practice, spring games. There's another transfer portal window that opens in the beginning of May. So I think it's kind of pointless to start doing predictions right now, but you do need to understand the scheduling dynamics before you even begin to do prediction videos, I think, especially when you're talking about, who's going to win the conference, who's going to make the playoffs, things like that, because it's not just as simple as going, well, I think these are the two best teams in the SEC, so I think those two teams are making the SEC championship game. It's not that simple, because like I just showed you with Texas and Oklahoma, the schedules are so vastly different. I could do the same thing with like Georgia and Missouri. Missouri's got a way easier road than Georgia does. So it's not just Texas and Oklahoma. The reality is, because of expanded conferences, 16 teams, 18 teams in the Big Ten, no divisions anymore, and you're only playing 8 or 9 conference games, there's no way to prevent the schedules from being unequal. There really isn't. Now, over the long run, that will tend to even itself out couple of years down the road, Oklahoma's going to get an easier draw in terms of conference schedule than Texas will. Or Missouri's going to end up with a really tough conference schedule, and Florida will get a break. Florida's another team that just had a brutal conference schedule last year and this year. So it will sort of even itself out over the long run, but on a year-to-year basis, there's going to be some teams that just have a much more difficult path to the conference title game than others. So you really have to understand scheduling before you get to the point where you start to make predictions. So that's why I do these schedule videos, to sort of give myself an idea of who these teams are playing and how the schedules stack up against each other within the different leagues. So there you go. That's a look at Oklahoma's schedule for 2025. Let me know down below what you think. Have a good morning.